Are you overwhelmed with your ranch, whether it be financially, mentally, operationally, or all of the above? Let's talk through how to break out of that overwhelm. Hey, I'm Shaye, and you're listening to the Casual Cattle Conversations podcast. Today, we are visiting with Jasper Oeltjen, and we're going to talk about what causes overwhelm for ranchers, the kinds of impacts it has on the ranch, whether that's financially, operationally, mentally, and personally, because they're all tied together. And then more importantly, Jasper's really going to share a framework for where you can start and how you can break out of that overwhelm and set yourself up for success for years and even generations to come if you pass the skill set down to the next one. So remember to check us out on YouTube as well and hit subscribe. But with that, let's visit with Jasper. Well, Jasper, welcome to the podcast. This has been a long time coming. I know we've been going back and forth for a few months, but this is really exciting because we've got a lot of things in the works for ranchers out there.
Yeah, I'm very excited. We definitely needed to make it through calving season for both of us first, so that helped a lot. It feels like a weight has been lifted and we get to move forward with this a little bit more. So I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. So for those listening, we're going to talk a lot about overwhelm as ranchers, which I know everyone experiences. I don't think you get to ranch without experiencing overwhelm at some point, but most importantly, we're also going to talk about frameworks and strategies to reduce that. But before we dive into that, Jasper, why don't you kind of introduce yourself to the listeners so they know who you are?
My name is Jasper Oeltjen. I live in Southeast Minnesota. My husband and I have had a cow-calf operation for about 14 years now, and even before that, I came from a hobby farm operation where we calved all year round and got to experience that growing up, which is where I fell in love with cattle. I'm actually an educator by trade, so I used to teach elementary school. We had an elementary shop class essentially, so I got to teach some of that and I got to bring in some awesome agriculture elements into that as well. And then took a little side journey and did some work in the IT corporate space where I helped businesses understand their strategic goals in their businesses and how to piece in their technology to meet those goals. And that's really where that strategy piece came into play for me, is learning through that role. And then our operation actually grew and exploded for us. There was a time that we were just hustle to get our operation where we wanted. We're not technically first generation farmers and ranchers, but we really were shaping our operation differently. And we were just hustling. And when you're starting a new operation, that's just what you do. And we had hit a place where we finally grew to like, yes, we got here. And then we kept hustling and kept hustling and kept hustling, but our operation wasn't actually going anywhere. We kind of like plateaued and flatlined. And we were so busy and overwhelmed, we couldn't figure out like, why is this not working for us anymore? What happened? We're doing the same thing. This should be working. This was probably about 5 years ago that we started reassessing our strategy. And I started pulling some of those elements of strategy conversations with businesses and things like that to really help us form what our goals were, how we wanted to move our operation forward, and to pull ourselves out of reacting constantly, which is really where Heritage and Horizons, which is the business that I also own, is really taking form from. It got born from that place of constantly living in reaction and how do we pull ourselves out of it and keep ourselves moving forward. So Heritage and Horizons was born out of that.
Awesome. You know, it's been several years, like you mentioned, that you've taken a step back and built strategies out for yourself. What have you seen for your operation and even your own personal lives? What's changed from that?
For sure. So like I mentioned before, it's really the two of us, my husband and myself, running the operation. And we both had full-time jobs, and trying to stay on top of that was just too much. And instead of having a plan of attack, we were just constantly reacting to the next problem that came up to us. Like, okay, we're needed to make feeding decisions. Well, I guess we're going to bale this dry and we're going to have to wrap it and figure it out later. And then that decision later in the winter was like, wait, we have enough feed, but is it the right kind of feed? What about our nutrition program? And it just had that domino effect of our one reactive decision set a set of dominoes that we really couldn't control after that because we didn't have a plan, right? We just were reacting to whatever was in front of us. Really being intentional about what do we want our nutrition program to look like? That was a really big change for us of how do we want to feed our cattle? We want to do it differently, but how are we going to do it differently? And just becoming clear about and intentional about what it is we wanted. The reaction is still there, right? Let's be honest. We're in agriculture. Everything's going to have some element of reaction to it. I can't help it when the cows get out or calving issues come up or whatever.
All your hay gets rained on, whatever it is. Yeah.
Of course, every time, right? So being able to reduce what doesn't have to be reactive, like being able to look ahead and plan ahead by just taking a day and actually having an office day and hashing out some decisions like that, actually reduce the amount of reactive decisions we had to make in the moment. So it actually feels like less to do, even though it really isn't less to do, just clear about what we're doing.
Absolutely. And I think from my perspective with my own experiences, friends and family, and even people who have gone through my Rancher Mind programs for the last 5 years or so, most ranchers know what they probably need to change. They just mentally feel so overwhelmed by those daily fires, which is completely understandable, that it's hard to focus or feel like you can take a day or even an hour spread out over a week to hash some of those things out and really sit down and say, this is actually what I need to do.
We tend to, in the agriculture space, get distracted by being busy is not the same as being productive, right? We're busy, we're doing all of the things from the outside looking in, like our cows were getting fed, all the chores were getting done. We were checking all the boxes, but we weren't actually like headed in a direction for operations. So we were meeting the expectations we were setting for ourselves, right? We wanted higher weaning weights. We wanted better quality animals. We knew that, but we weren't making decisions that aligned with that goal as well. It's so easy to forget and slip into it because we know we need to get it done.
Yeah. So I want to go back to overwhelm itself. And what you and I have talked about off air was there's mental overwhelm, there's operational overwhelm, and there's financial overwhelm. And all of those can kind of be sticky and intertwined, but I do want to break them apart separate. So I actually want to talk about the financial overwhelm first. Do you want to talk about the impact that has on operations and what you see with your clients, family, friends, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So that mental and operation and financial overwhelm get braided all together, right? When you pull on that one thread of one of them, the other two seem to follow along pretty quickly, right? When we're talking about overwhelm and being in constant reaction mode, our bottom line, our financials are actually impacted by that. We may not see it in the moment of I'm reacting to, we know weather's going to be crazy and we just need to get the hay down and don't really have a plan for what it's going to look like or what we need with our feed. But like I said earlier, there's a domino effect to that, and our financials can definitely be impacted by that. I actually probably want to move back into the operational decision making first before we really touch on that finances, because our finances are affected by how we run our operation, right? So when we're looking at our operation and we're adding unnecessary fires to it, for example, if we have to make breeding changes, we already know proactively we have a bull that's aging out of our program, or we have an entire group of cows that are older and kind of not been producing as great of calves or maybe having complications while calving, and we don't address that and we just kind of let that linger and continue, we're going to have maybe a really tough calving season with those older girls, right? And not only does that put extra labor and pressure on us, it actually adds extra hands-on with medications if we need to be constantly treating them or treating mom. All those little tiny operational things that we have to do to handle the situation turn into financial impact. We're putting extra cost into medication. We're putting extra cost into any hired hands or labor that we have. We're slowly chipping away at our margin because of some of these operational decisions we just weren't thinking far enough ahead of. And all of that to say, then we really understand where that mental overwhelm comes from. It feels like we're bogged down. We don't have a very clear vision and direction of what we're doing. So those three things really kind of are braided together into big picture operational impacts by financial, mental, and decision making moving forward on your operation.
And personally, I feel when I get into a state of overwhelm, I become so much more reactive, and it just builds into a worse fire, no matter what it is. And everyone responds to stress differently. Some people shut down. Some people get busier because that's how they're wired. They like to get stuff done, but it might not be the right stuff, like you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and to build on that, we're a unique industry where so much of our manpower comes from people in our lives that we care about. And when we're really mentally bogged down, we not are only affecting our business, our operations, and our finances, but we're really impacting potentially relationships. Unintentionally, we are dragged down and we're responding, like you're saying, in a stress state, and that can trickle into our relationships with your business partners or your family members, whoever they might be, who you work with every day. And that can be really hard and can cause bigger problems down the road if we never address that or never change it.
And I do think it's important to note that there are some seasons that can't be avoided. I think of last fall on our operation, my father-in-law had to have a surgery for a health complication, and it was necessary. He pushed it off as long as he could to try and be cognizant of harvest and weaning or this or that. But that took him out of the labor force. And in addition to that, I was getting very pregnant, so my physical capabilities also were not there, and we don't have a hired man. We have a few people who can help here and there, but that sometimes is harder than having no one at all if it's not necessarily always reliable. And we got through that season, we got past it, but it led to some decisions that were more reactive or maybe were not normal for us. And we figured it out, we got through it, but it's a real thing.
Yeah, and if you don't really have that foundation of goals and decision making to start with, you're digging yourself a deeper hole, right? If you're already starting here and have a solid foundation of, okay, this season's really going to be rough, we can fall back on what we've already built foundationally on the operation and we can get through it. But when you're already starting at a negative and then you have inevitable situations like that, it just digs yourself a deeper hole, and that can be really hard to dig out of.
There are a few things more important than the land beneath our feet and the farmers and ranchers who work it every day. At Noble Research Institute, we believe those closest to the land are its greatest guardians, and for more than 80 years, we've made it our mission to help them thrive. Noble is the nation's largest nonprofit dedicated to farm and ranch management education. Through applied research, in-person workshops, and on-demand courses, we give producers the tools and knowledge to regenerate their land, strengthen their grazing operations, and build lasting business success. From soil health to stocking rates to bottom line profitability, Noble works alongside farmers and ranchers at every step, because healthy land and profitable operations go hand in hand. Explore our courses and resources at noble.org. Noble Research Institute. Better is possible.
So you talked about not having those goals and decisions, and fortunately we did have those to an extent where we could almost, I say, minimize the damage because we weren't going to be able to fully do what we wanted, but we were able to at least make decisions that weren't going to be completely negative. But do you think not having those, whether you call them principles, goals, or just a general direction for the operation, is that the root cause of a lot of that overwhelm?
Yeah, I would say there's two things that I notice with the people that I work with is a lack of understanding what your true goals are. What does it look like at the next 5 years for you? What do you want to be accomplishing? And what I notice is everybody kind of has a different idea of what that might look like. And that really ties into the second piece, which is not clear expectations, or we haven't really talked about roles and responsibilities and how that all fits into what those goals might look like. And tension comes from that, and overwhelm. It kind of just all rolls into it, right? And deciding a goal for the next 5 years can feel super big, right? We can be like, oh my God, in 5 years, I want this perfect thing, but that seems so far away and I don't even know where to start from there. We're looking at the tippy top of Mount Everest and we're at the bottom. And that can be very discouraging for sure. I use the analogy a lot with my clients about a map. I'm a Midwestern girly, like I said, in Minnesota. we don't fly anywhere. We take 14-hour car rides to wherever we need to go, and that's vacation. So I like to use the analogy of a road trip. And if you don't really know what you want your destination to be, what's going to look like, if everybody in your family wants to go to a different place, how are you going to decide? You can't just be driving in circles. You're never going to get anywhere. So what is it that you want your goals? Do you want to go to the mountains? Do you want to go to the beach? Those are two very different experiences and two very different things that you want. How to get everybody on the same page. And then there's lots of different kinds of mountains. There's lots of different kinds of beaches. Which one are we still headed to? And so that helps us maybe conceptualize how to set a goal on a farming operation, and how do we start making decisions that point us, if we're going north and you're actually making decisions that point us south, let's recorrect and reset our navigation.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you want to touch on what a framework would look like for producers to start making those changes and reducing overwhelm?
Yeah, for sure. So this type of like goal setting in corporate structures is pretty common, and reassessing yearly what progress has been made towards goals is pretty standard. And I feel like, correct me if I'm misspeaking, but in our industry, I don't see a lot of operations thinking in that kind of way.
There are definitely some that I would assume do based on what the outward progress looks like. But then again, what you see on the outside isn't necessarily what's happening on the inside of a business. Since those are related, there are some that I think do, but also in my experience, I don't think it's as common as it should be.
Yeah. Or if it is, we don't talk about it much. We keep things kind of hush-hush about how we run our operations, I feel like, in our industry. I like to talk about that because I feel like we can learn from each other. I think that's the best thing I've learned from this experience in general, and participating in all sorts of different kinds of conversations about this, is we all have very similar struggles. And while we tackle those differently, they all kind of fall in the same general categories, which is where this framework came from that I'm going to go into. But I was just curious from your experience as well, what that looked like.
Yeah, and I think part of it is, it depends on the background. Someone who maybe had another job or worked in an industry previously where they were used to setting those goals, or had that framework from generations above them who were intentional about it and following through with it, they're going to fall into it more naturally than people who don't have that. And everyone's wired different too. If you're not a planner to think about setting goals, etc., like some people are, well, it's right up here, it's right up here. But for me personally, yeah, I have goals up here, but if I don't write them down, that goal is constantly changing and shifting, and next thing you know, all the work I was doing took me nowhere. So that's a big part of it too. And goal setting isn't sexy. Everyone wants profit, everyone wants money, but you need to goal set to get to that. So
That's so true. So when I walk through this with my clients, like I said, it feels like we're looking at Mount Everest and trying to figure out how we're supposed to get to the top, and that can be really daunting. I really have 4 phases that I really like to break it down into. And again, I love an analogy, and we love a road trip here in Minnesota. So that first phase is that goal setting phase. We are determining, where are you going on vacation? Does everybody have the same idea of what vacation looks like? Once we figure out what kind of vacation you want, where is that going to take place, right? So we're really going to talk about your goals. I have some very key pieces that we discuss and really clear, defined, this is what this means. And then we break those down into a little bit smaller versions of, now how do I get there? And I'm going to the mountains. I know I'm going to the Rocky Mountains, and I know we're going to get a cabin. Great. And let's break that down. And then we move into phase 2 even further, where I know I'm going to this specific location. Let's get that route drawn out. I know I'm going to take this highway. We're getting our map out and having a very clear path to get there. I want to know what you can do on your operation to get to the goal that you've set. If your goal is to become more optimized, so we're going to just take what I already have and tweak it. I know I can do better in this area. This is what I want to happen. I want to have better weaning weights. Great. We can do that over the next 5 years, and we're going to get you to that goal. But we really need to get on the nitty gritty side. And what are you tweaking and twisting to get you to reach that goal over the course of 1, 2, 3, 4 years. So those are the first 2 phases. The third phase is understanding your tactics, your metrics, what is actually happening on the day-to-day. This is usually the part everybody skips to, where I just want to do, right? My husband's the doer. He is the guy who's going to get it done. We forget that we need to understand why we're doing, what's the purpose of doing. If it doesn't match our goals, then we're driving the wrong direction, right? So this is really figuring out how we're going to get to our pit stops, all of the places we're going to have overnights. This is going to be a long road trip. 5 years is a long time. So where are our pit stops? Where are we staying overnight? And then the last piece, I really love to spend time here. I don't think we talk about it enough, is the proactivity piece. I want to avoid every single construction site. We're, again, Midwest, we have construction season for like 6 months of the year.
It's either winter or construction season. That's all we get.
Exactly. So where can we avoid construction so we're not held up? How do I avoid a traffic jam in this city because I know it's going to happen? This is where we look at your operation as a whole and understand, I have a whole herd of 12-year-old cows. They're going to need to be phased out, and I have nothing to replace them with. We haven't been retaining heifers to backfill that herd size if I want to keep that herd size. What's my plan? And I'm noticing that far out in advance, not the year that I need to be switching them out or things like that. So we're looking way far down the road and then figuring out how can I avoid a potential problem. So those are the 4 phases: that goal setting, our short-term targets, our tactics and metrics, and then making sure that we are proactively planning ahead.
Do you want to share a little bit more about how you help ranchers determine what those goals are supposed to be? Because sometimes I think that gets to be a messy part where I catch myself almost avoiding that sometimes because it might require a lot of deeper introspective or thought, or maybe looking at things I don't want to. I know some people are push off looking deep into the finances because they just don't want to know, when in reality it might be better than they think, or it could be worse, but you don't know. So how do you help producers determine what those goals should be?
When I'm working with a producer and they're coming to me and they're like, hey, I really want to go through this program, our first stop is actually a phone call or a video chat, and we just talk. We just yammer. Let's be real. Everybody loves a cup of coffee and a chat about cows. At least that's my favorite thing to do. So we talk about what works really well for you, what doesn't work well for you. And then we start through that conversation. I start hearing themes of, I really wish blank, I really like blank. And those all, as we talk, start to kind of align and fit together. And by the end, I ask them one of 4 categories. So like I mentioned before, are we going to optimize what you currently have? How can I take what I've already got and make it even better? We have an innovation phase. So I really feel good about where we're at, and I want to be pushing the boundary, pushing our operation to the next level. And how do I do that? We have maintain. I'm happy with everything that we have right now, and I just want to continue it so the next generation can come back. Or I know somebody wants to be joining. How do I just keep this sustained and they can continue on how they see fit? Or growth. That's the one that usually we fall into on our operation, is how are we going to grow? How can I look at what we've got? We feel like we have a solid foundation. How do we add to what we already have? That could be adding streams of income. That could be adding a new section into our operation. We want to add a feedlot. We've already got cow-calf. Let's add a feedlot. How do we build more? And through those conversations, we can usually identify one of the 4 that we really want to focus on. A lot of them can be intertwined, like innovate and optimize really overlap a lot, or growth and those things overlap a lot. And then I just start asking more targeted questions of, well, would you rather bring home a brand new group of heifers today if you could? Or would you rather get some better calves out of what you've already are producing? Which one sounds more appealing? And we have conversations as a team about overall what makes the most sense for where we're at right now. We like to talk in my crews about all of the things.
Yeah. Well, I even think about it just myself. There are parts of our operation that, yeah, good maintaining. But then there are definitely other parts that it's like, nope, we need to innovate, or other areas where we need to optimize. So it's constantly changing when you break your operation down into those bigger pictures.
Absolutely. And the larger you get, the harder it is to stay on top of all of it. I know in the back of my mind, I have these things that I definitely can do better on, but I'm always living in this world, and this is where all of our focus tends to land. So it's easy to fall into that for sure.
Well, especially for diversified operations. My husband is super passionate about agronomy and his independent crop consulting. And then there's farming. And then we also have the cows, which is where I'm most passionate. And fortunately, we can split up, and that helps take some of the weight off. But when you have so much going on, and plus my business, so all 4 of those things have their own segments, it can feel like a lot right away. But I have found doing framework similar to what you described, it makes it so much simpler, because when things do feel stressful or overwhelmed, I can go back to the whiteboard right over here and say, okay, this is what we're working for in 5 years. Here's what we need to do in the meantime. And then weather changes, markets change, whatever it may be. Yes, we may have to adjust, but at least we can adjust and make decisions, minimize the damage, like I said earlier, based on still what that long-term goal is.
Absolutely. And building on what you said, I can prioritize what's the most important and what's going to affect my goal the most. Although these other things are out of my control, what is in my control that I can adjust to minimize that damage or really needs my attention. So I'm not wasting my time and energy on something that's not going to move me towards my goal, right? I can very much separate those 2 categories. Yes, these need to get done and handled, but I don't need to spend extra time on them. We can coast. These are the things I really have to focus on in this situation. And that can help that reactivity and overwhelm a lot.
Jasper, is there anything else we haven't touched on related to the topic of overwhelm or even your framework that you want to share with listeners today?
Yeah, I think the thing that I would love for people to take away is this process. It sounds intense. It sounds like a lot. It is not a sexy topic to talk about, but it also doesn't mean you have to overhaul everything. It feels like, as maybe I'm talking through a framework and all of these nitty-gritty details, that just requires too much work and effort from me. And really it doesn't. It is more about intentionality, carving out a little bit of time to move your operation in a more strategic and intentional way. This does not mean you have to overhaul everything that you do on the day-to-day. It more means I can be more targeted to make my gains better in whatever that looks like for me.
And like you said, it might just be optimizing or maintaining, but you don't know until you take the time to figure that out and dive into it a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Or maybe just one thing of keeping better records to even figure out where you're at, or being able to assess what you do have and how do we use that to our advantage now. I have all this information, probably. Most people do. Now, how do I use it to make myself better? It doesn't mean we have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Yeah, and the other point I want to bring up is earlier you brought up sometimes people might be overwhelmed with the timeline, like, how am I going to get all this done in 5 years? Or some people do 10 years goals. I've stepped away from that because 10 years is so hard to visually imagine. It's almost impossible sometimes. And there's a quote that I heard in 10x is greater than 2x. And the quote might not be word for word, but the gist of it is that entrepreneurs kill themselves with the timeline. And as ranchers, we're entrepreneurs. And so we might get caught up in, well, how the heck am I going to get this done in this amount of time? And sometimes once you break things down, and yes, still put a timeline on it, but I found once we get started on something, you build that momentum. And if it's truly right, you're going to get it done faster. And the projects that take longer, maybe they weren't meant to be done in 3 years. Maybe they were a 5-year. And so that's just something to keep in mind for those of you listeners is don't kill yourself with the timeline on these things either.
Absolutely. To build on that, I shot archery when I was young, and we always talked about a minute change while I'm shooting here at this point can have such a huge range of change where the target is. So that minute change can actually really shift everything for you as long as you know that you're doing it, right? And I feel like that builds exactly to what you're saying of sometimes those things take longer and sometimes they don't take as long as you think they're going to.
So, for those of you listening, Jasper and I are going to be hosting a Rancher Mind series all about this stuff. Yes, Rancher Minds are back after the 6, 7, 8 month hiatus, but they're coming back, and we're going to kick it off with Jasper, who's going to really talk through a lot of what we did today, but you're going to get that hands-on experience, that guidance, just to make the process feel simpler and easier.
Yeah, I am so looking forward to it. My favorite part of my job is talking to producers and watching them have a light bulb moment of, oh, I guess I didn't realize that that's what I wanted. And I can't wait to work through it with a new crew. So I'm so excited to start working together on that.
Yeah. So if you are interested in learning more about what this Rancher Mind is, what it's going to entail, there's going to be a link in the description, and you can go there and let us know you're interested, and from there we'll be in touch and make sure you have what you need, and you can ask us questions, etc., to figure out if this is right for you. But with that, Jasper, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Shaye. This was awesome.
All right, folks, remember the best way to support this podcast and all your other favorite podcasts is to leave a rating or review, and better yet, share it with a friend who's going to find this information valuable. And remember to watch us on YouTube. With that, happy ranching.